Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. Here we go again. Big trade with the Eagles. And normally I have a little bit of dialogue for you guys, but I got one of my chatty buddies on with me today. So we're just going to burn it on every end. We're going to take some questions as we go. We're going to talk about the trade, talk about the ramifications of it all. Rumors about Russell Wilson. A lot of Philly fans are upset with the trade, and I think equally there's a lot of fans that are okay with the trade. And to help me break it all down and talk about it today, WIP's midday show, joining me is one Joe DeCamera, my buddy. Man, how you doing today, Joe?
Seth, good to see you, man. Hope you've been holding up well through this pandemic crazy time, but always good to talk some football with you, man. Hope life's going good for
you. It is crazy, man. Just so much going on in the world of football. A lot going on with the Eagles. Today Alabama and Ohio State have their pro days, and the debate on the quarterbacks are raging. The top three. But most importantly, last week the Philadelphia Eagles make a move. They make a trade with the Miami Dolphins, moving back from position 6, to 12, and then swapping a 5th round pick, 156 overall, for a 4th round pick, 123. And the Bluebirds were out on social media. Not only on social media, there was a lot of disenchanted fans about this trade. But at the same time, I believe that, there's just as many fans that's okay with it. Give me your take, how you felt about it.
Yeah, I was happy with it, Seth. I was live on the air when it happened. And, when a situation like that, and there's so much to process at first. I got my producer saying it, and I'm like, well, hold on, wait, repeat. So, sometimes it's one of those things you got to digest it for a second and try to figure out what the heck's going on. But as I was able to process it, I thought it was very good value. I know that it essentially means the Eagles will not get Jamar Chase. That's obvious. And it obviously means they won't draft one of the quarterbacks in the top 6 or in the top 4 if they were going to move up that high, or in the top 3, depending on how aggressive they wanted to get. So it takes a couple of those type of things off the board. And some of that might be viewed as a good, some of it might be viewed as a bad, depending on what you think of Hurts and those quarterbacks. But I think the big thing for a lot of fans was, hey, Jamar Chase is not going to be an Eagle. That's a bummer. Had my heart set on Jamar Chase. And I get that line of thinking. But at the same time, to get a whole extra first-round draft pick, next year, and to know that a team that clearly needs to rebuild, and let's be real, this team needed to rebuild, now has what probably will amount to 4 first-round draft picks in 2 years. Pretty darn good. That Carson thing obviously has to convert to the first round, but to get 4 of them, I think is pretty good. So I was happy with it. I thought it was good value. And from a listener standpoint, based on what I heard and just the sense talking to friends and people around town, you're right, totally split. I would say maybe leaning slightly more toward liking it. And I'm just going to throw out a 60-40. I could be off there a little bit, but people saw the value in the extra pick. But again, at the same time, yard dropping down, and people were locking in Jamar Chase and were very interested in getting him.
Well, Joe, let's break that down, because you've got a situation where, if you had to really read the tea leaves of what Jeffrey Lurie said the day that he fired Doug Peterson. I get, a lot of the fans, they look at a guy like Jamar Chase, they look at a kid like Kyle Pitts, and they say to themselves, hey, that guy can be a difference maker. But my question is, would one of those guys really make that much of a difference, on the team that is clearly in rebuild mode? And a lot of people will say, okay, maybe not rebuild mode. I think there's a lot of fans out there that really don't see it as rebuild mode because of, what we look like on the offensive side of the ball. And, a lot of that hinges upon the advancement and development of Jalen Hurts. So their thought is, hey, we had an impact guy right away. But if the rest of the team needs retooling and rebuilding, then to me, this is the move that you make, because it's not so much about an impact guy right now that in his rookie year may or may not be, a Justin Jefferson type player. So when you look at, what Jeffrey Lurie said, hey, we parted ways not because Doug Peterson deserved to be fired. We parted ways because there was a difference in vision and where we're headed. We had our 5-year run at the Super Bowl. We knew that this day was coming where we had to, address some of these contracts, and we were going to be over the salary cap. And this is where we are. We are looking, quote unquote, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. That told me right there that Jeffrey and Howie are looking at rebuilding this thing. So if you're looking at rebuilding it, then absolutely this move makes all the sense in the world, because you move out of 6, okay? You allow yourself to move back to, and I always said if they can move anywhere between 10 and 12, they'd be still positioned really well, because I think the thing that people aren't looking at, listen, you got 5 quarterbacks that are probably going to go in the top 12 picks, okay? You've got 3 to 4 wide receivers that we know that are probably going to go somewhere in there. You've got a top flight tight end that's certainly going to go in the top 10. And you got a top tier offensive lineman that's going to go in there. Even though they move back to 12, there's going to be value, by the time they get to 12. That just thinking, hey, if Howie doesn't do anything else, and that's highly unlikely, okay? It's highly unlikely that he doesn't do anything else. But if he didn't do anything else, when you think of how the quarterbacks and the wide receivers will push talent back to the position where the Eagles sit, they're going to be okay. Now, whether Howie makes the right decision or not, that's to be discussed also. But in my opinion, I think they're sitting in a really good spot to really continue to look and understand that they can get top value even at 12.
Well, I mean, Seth, I totally agree with you. I mean, first of all, the 12th pick in the draft it's a great pick to have. I mean, it's not as good as the first pick, and it's not as good as the 6th pick, but it's still the 12th best player. And to your point, when you mentioned all those quarterbacks, it's probably not even the 12th best player. It's probably like the 8th or 9th best player when you really size it up, because you get these teams that are desperate for quarterbacks and they start reaching. And to your point, 5 QBs will probably go in front of them. So they're probably going to get somewhere between the the 8th to 10th best player in the draft. That's great. All those positions you mentioned, absolutely. Plus the corner, cornerback's a real position. There's 2 different guys there that could get a corner. So, I don't think there's any doubt that they got good value. I think it's a great thing for the Eagles. I think one of the things that has made this use of the term rebuild and this whole, and might have tied into the Doug, Lurie, Roseman dynamic, as you mentioned, after the season, is part of what makes this Eagles situation a little different than past times that the Eagles have been here when they're just sunk down at the bottom, or other organizations, is they are in a weak division. And so you do say, well, hey, there is a chance to win the division. And I believe there is. There is a chance to win the division in 2021. None of us would say that if the Eagles were in the AFC West with Kansas City. You wouldn't say it, you wouldn't think it. It would be totally different. But knowing that putting together a halfway decent team could net you, I guess what we used to call 9-7, 8-8. I don't know what that becomes now, 9-8 with the 17-game schedule, whatever the heck it is. It's trying to figure out how to weigh that is obviously part of this. But value-wise, and what I think is a necessary rebuild, I thought it was outstanding value that Howie got with the trade.
At the end of the day, we'll see. I guess the biggest question is, I posted as soon as they made this trade, what a smart move it was. And man, my social media post just lit up, and everybody's thing was, oh yeah, that's all great, that you can trade back. You pick up, a 4th rounder for a 5th rounder this year, and then next year, you get in the 1st rounder. The only thing that's barring the Eagles from getting the 1st rounder out of Carson Wentz is probably injury, because I don't think, as bad as he plays, I don't think he's not going to be in the game. So
Totally.
that's almost assured. You go into next year with 3 first-round draft picks. You realize that this year is a year where, on the defensive side of the ball, I think is where they're going to have their biggest struggle. I think offensively, the young wide receivers can grow up. You can, bring in another running back to add some depth and create some competition at that position. Yet to be determined. What the heck are they going to do with Zach Ertz? I mean, is the plan to keep him, within the constructs because, hey, he still is under contract. Or, do they move him and replace him? So, and if the offensive line can stay healthy and Jalen Hurts can pick up this offense and play halfway decent and they can run the ball and be balanced in what they do, then they have a chance. They have a shot at being a halfway decent, offense. But on the defensive side of the ball, in my opinion, is where they're going to struggle the most because of the lack of talent and then the change of it's a lot easier to implement your offense, in my opinion, than it is the defense. It takes longer for a switch of defense and defensive philosophies to take hold. That being said, I think the Eagles, they sit in the right position if you want to look at it from a position of rebuilding, and I don't think we can look at it as anything less than that, when you really stop and think about all the things that Jeffrey Lurie has said and the actions that we see out of the organization as far as what they're doing, how they're trading, how they're moving and maneuvering to get themselves in position. You realize they're going to have 3 first-round draft picks next year. I believe 2 second-round draft picks next year. And, they're probably going to have upwards of $60 to $70 million in cap space. Now, we saw, what the New England Patriots did this year with $70 million in cap space. Can you imagine three first-round draft picks, 2 twos, and $70 million in cap space? We can get healthy really quick, in my opinion, if we look at it from the proper perspective.
Look, Seth, I agree with you. Now, in the end, a lot of this is going to come down to, I guess I'll say 2 guys initially. One is Hurts. How good is he? How long is he the guy, or do they have to pivot quickly? I mean, I was making the point today, on my show that after Randall 95 and he got benched 4th game in 95, the team really didn't have a quarterback until Donovan 99. And really that was ultimately Donovan 2000 when he actually, developed into a good player in his second year. I mean, they went through the wilderness. So you don't want to go through the wilderness. Hurts could get you another guy. I mean, the Redskins, for the most part, have been looking for a quarterback for 30 years. So that is a dicey proposition. The other one is Howie. I mean, all these picks are great in theory, but it's just numbers. It's just rounds, and it's and it's not about positions. It's about players. It's about who can actually play. It's not drafting a cornerback. It's drafting a quarterback that can play. So that's where I think to the point that you brought up about all the negativity on social media. I think one of the biggest themes that's going around in Philly lately, big time, is how much people doubt Howie. And frankly, I think it's gone over the top. I think it's a narrative, Seth, that's gone a little crazy. I mean, to me, there's a difference between saying a guy's had a bad last 3 years, a guy should be fired, both of which I think are reasonable positions for most people to have. And I had that position on both. In the end, I called for Howie to be fired after the season. I didn't do so like shouting it to the hills because I didn't think it was like the most justified ever. But okay, I get it. He's drafted bad for 3 years. There's a price to be paid, fire him. But where I really disagree with a lot of people, Seth, is how many people speak with such passion that Howie's a total joke and has no chance to draft a good player and has no chance to rebuild the Eagles. And I say to them, like, well, how can you say that? He did it 5 years ago and they won a Super Bowl. Like, how in the world can you possibly think that he's got no shot to turn this around? So I just think it's a really faulty line of thinking. I push back on people all the time on my show. But I'm telling you, man, most people are very entrenched in that position. I think it's a crazy position to hold.
Well, then let's debate it, Joe, because I think that that there's grounds for it. You go back to 2016, 2017, and a lot of the moves that Howie Roseman made were smart free agent moves. They weren't necessarily draft picks that he made that would impact players. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of the stat, that we've only had one Pro Bowl player drafted, in the last 4 drafts, I believe it is.
Well, it's
And
even
that
more,
was
it's even more than that. I believe it's one Pro Bowler since after Zach Ertz in 2013. It's one Pro Bowler since 2014, and that's
right.
Carson is no longer here. Prior to that, you got to go back to Ertz, Fletcher, and Brandon Graham.
Right.
So anyway, so I'm with you.
So I mean, there's basis for that, and then when you throw into the mix J-Jaw, you throw into the mix what happened last year with Jalen Reagor, and with Justin Jefferson sitting right there. You don't take the guy; he winds up being the offensive rookie of the year. When you look at those things lends itself, because the one thing that we do in Philadelphia is we look back at past drafts and we look at guys that we could have had, and we make a big stink about the fact that we drafted the other guy when we could have had that guy. So from that perspective, that narrative never dies. It never dies in Philadelphia. We'll be talking about Terry McLaurin. We'll be talking about DK Metcalf. We'll be talking about these guys, till they retire, till they're no longer in the NFL. And as long as Howie's around, that tag is going to be on him. Now, you've got all these draft picks that the Eagles have, compiled. And the problem will be that if he misses, and listen, I'm not going to throw all the blame on him, because I understand the importance of being able to develop the talent that you have. If the players that are on the Eagles roster, if they could not play, then they would not have been vetted and they would not have been drafted by this football team. They might have been somewhere else. We see it all the time where guys come here, they can't get it together, they go somewhere else, and someone extracts the talent out of them and they become extremely productive. Okay, so I'm not going to put all the onus on Howie. I'm going to have to put some of it on the coaches, because coaching is more than just handing out a game plan. You got to help a player figure out how to maximize his potential and get the best of his ability. And when that doesn't happen with a player, some of that has to fall on the position coaches that you have on the roster. But why is it that everyone else, can pluck these diamonds, out of the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, and these guys come in and tear it up and become Pro Bowl players, and we can't? So as long as that narrative is there, then there's some validity to the fact that, Doug Peterson lost his job and he was a Super Bowl winning coach. Why the heck didn't Howie Roseman? How come he wasn't shown the door along with him? Because normally that's what happens. You hired him.
Yeah. And again, Seth, I mean, I agree with you, to be clear. I would have fired Howie. I said it. I was very clear about that right after the season. So I'm with you. Where I differentiate from people is when they say it's impossible he ever gets us going again. He stinks. He's the worst. I don't know how people can arrive at that conclusion after they won a Super Bowl 4 years ago. And to your point, and I get it, a lot of those moves, a lot of what was the construct of that team was free agent moves, some lower level stuff, some draft picks from Andy's time. I mean, Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. There were a lot of key players, Jason Kelce, that were from the Andy Reid era, where Andy had final say on personnel, even though Howie was the GM. So I get it. It's complicated. Obviously, the big score was Carson, and through 2017, Carson was great till the injury. I mean, I get it all, but there's no doubt Howie. Look, if I'm Jeffrey Lurie, I'm saying to Howie Roseman, I would have said it to him 2 months ago. Howie, I'm keeping you. I mean, I would not have said I'm keeping you, but Lurie chose to say I'm keeping you. But I would have said, but let's be real clear, man. I need a great 12 months. I mean, I need, and by the way, I'm talking like the next 2 months. I need free agency. Not that you can make a ton of moves, but I need you to be creative in how you do it. And I need the draft. And you will be judged in 2021 on the basis of these moves. And if I don't feel they net in a positive way for the Eagles, or I feel like we're moving in the right direction, you're gone after 2021. Now, to me, that's a message that needs to be delivered. I'm assuming, Seth, when you were a young player, you probably had position coaches in your ear saying, you got to give me this or you're gone. Matter of fact, you were gone. You were cut. And you came back swinging, and God bless you, and you made yourself a hell of a player who I think should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So, sometimes people just, need to be told directly, this is what I need from you. And if you don't do it, you're out. If I'm Jeffrey Lurie, that's how I would have framed the conversation.
Well, a lot of people will look at that and say, if I go back to when Chip Kelly was fired, Jeffrey put Howie back in a position of power,
Yeah,
and the mandate was accountability across the board,
I remember that.
emotional intelligence, within the organization, I mean, which I thought was a bunch of BS until I went and read up on it a little bit. I still think it's a little bit of BS. I think these kids need a kick in the behind more than they need a little bit of emotional patting on the back.
Yep.
But back then Jeffrey's mandate was everyone across the board is accountable. Okay, so the accountability got us a Super Bowl, and then the accountability, went nowhere. You saw no accountability. Carson didn't assume any accountability. Doug very rarely assumed, accountability. Howie stepped up to the mic every single time that he was in a press conference. There was no accountability. I think that Howie Roseman is in a position right now, Joe, where, those conversations have happened. I think, sometimes, when you have success, it breeds this sense that, I'm infallible.
Yep.
And I think what happened in 2017, no one expected, I don't care what they say, no one expected for the Eagles to win the Super Bowl in 2017. No one. And then Doug came out, hey, welcome to the new normal. Howie, was strutting around like a peacock, with his feathers, spread. And it created this sense of, I can do no wrong. So for all the good moves that he made 3 years later, look at all the bad moves that he wound up making that wound up hurting the team, from being way too loyal and keeping guys way too long on the roster to, extending and, extending contracts, that put the team in a financial bind, to draft pick misses and things of that nature. I'm playing with house money now. I like this guy, Jay Jaw. So I'm going to spend a second round pick on him, instead of going with what the gurus said and where the chain of value truly was. I think he did the same exact thing last year. Everyone knew that Justin Jefferson was the best wide receiver at 21, and yet he turned around and took another guy with this both. And I don't know whether Doug really believed it or whether this was something that Howie fed him. Hey, he's not a fit for, Justin Jefferson is not a fit for what we do. But this kid, Jalen Reagor, is, not only is, he a fit, but he can return kicks and return punts. And I said to myself right then and there, I mean, you're blowing smoke, because if I draft a kid at 21 in the first round and he's supposed to eventually be my number one wide receiver, he ain't returning no punts and no kicks, because I can't afford to have him hurt trying to return kicks and not be able to be my wide receiver number one. So I think that Howie is in this position now where I don't think he goes rogue and makes these picks that that leaves everyone scratching their heads. I think the Eagles are not in a position to draft a need. I think they're in a position to draft in the best available, and I think that Howie will do that this year. Whoever the guy is rated highest right there according to their board, that's the guy that he'll take.
Well, I hope so. There's one potential problem though with the whole thing. It's more than one, but one we haven't talked about yet. Is he making the pick? Now I got to tell you, Seth, I hope he's making the pick. But I mean, I've heard some stuff over the last year that Jeffrey Lurie is way more involved than people thought. We've heard various reports about it. I was told last April or May, whatever the heck it was, after the Hurts pick, I was told that Jeffrey Lurie made the pick. Now that information sort of, came out over time, but I was told that pretty early on. When you brought up Arcega-Whiteside, I mean, that's another one where, and I don't remember whose report it was, but there's been a report that links Lurie to the selection of Arcega-Whiteside. I mean, that to me is a complete disaster. And if you have that, then a bunch of things. One, bad for your team, obviously. None of us want Jeffrey Lurie picking players. It's preposterous. Okay. And by the way, I'm going to get back to that in a second. And number two is Number two is, oh yeah, it makes it harder to know what to hold Howie accountable for. And it makes me wonder, to answer your question, how does Howie have his job? When maybe he should have been gone, when I think he should have been gone. Very well may be because Lurie knows that Lurie himself made some picks, and how it would be unfair to hold Howie accountable for selections that weren't his own picks. So it gets really complicated there. And I also wonder, Seth, when we hear about things like Lurie involved with Arcega-Whiteside and Hurts, I mean, how do we know he's not involved in more? I don't know. I don't know that he didn't make the third-round pick or the first-round pick. I don't know that he didn't take Jalen Reagor. I have no idea. So that's a disaster. And one other thing, when you were laughing there when I brought up the idea of Lurie, and when I remember when it was a few weeks ago, we were talking draft and the whole who should be the Eagles quarterback. And if you remember, there was the Chris Mortensen report on ESPN that Jeffrey Lurie has put out there to his organization. Jalen Hurts is our guy. Let's stop with considerations otherwise. Hurts is our guy. And I thought it was a very odd thing, fundamentally, a month and a half before a draft, because when you have the sixth pick and there's teams all around you at quarterback interest, I just thought that was stupid to put out there. Even if you didn't want a quarterback, why tell the world that? That's number one. And number two, I mean, to the extent that if that report was true, how in the world can Jeffrey Lurie make a determination that Jalen Hurts should definitely be the quarterback unless he is literally breaking down tape of like BYU football and Alabama football and all these other teams with these quarterbacks? I mean, I want Jeffrey Lurie breaking down film so he can then say, all right, guys, I saw the film. These 5 guys, they're not the guy. We're going with Jalen Hurts because at least I looked at the – it's ridiculous. I looked at the film. I mean, what are we doing here? So very slippery slope, and frankly, one I think, Seth, that none of us on the outside really know how steep the slope is. But I think it's a great concern. I really do.
Well, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I asked my guest whether it was a good thing that Jeffrey was more involved than we thought he was, or it was a bad thing.
Yeah.
We see what goes on in Dallas, and we just know that every single year that Jerry's going to do something, to decimate his football team and put them, in the worst position, whether it's something he says about his quarterback or whether it's something that he says about his head coach. He's going to do something that psychologically damages that football team's ability to realize their true potential. I just believe that.
I agree.
I think when it comes to, Jeffrey, listen, the guy owns a $3.5 billion entity that he purchased and he bought. He can do, at the end of the day, whatever the heck he wants to do with it. But I think that he's had success with Andy. He's had success with Doug early on. And I don't know that there was a lot of intervening on his behalf during those two coaches' regimes.
I agree.
But we're sitting on the outside looking in. We just don't know. We don't know. I mean, your point about how do you judge Howie's accountability based upon if Jeffrey is the guy that's making the pick, then that opens a whole different can of worms, And that I never even considered or thought about that for a second, because the thought of an owner besides Jerry Jones pulling the trigger on a player has been so far out of bounds for me to even conceive that I just never even considered it. But you do make a great point. How do you hold someone accountable if you're the one that's making the decisions? And I thought the Philadelphia media did a phenomenal job of peppering him over that 50-minute press conference with questions. Well, how come Howie still has his job? And why is Howie still here and Doug is gone? It just went on. And he put on his tap shoes and he just danced around it. And, he talked about all the 5 potential future GMs that we have and that we are, a team and we make these decisions together. Well, why even have a GM? Why not just have a committee that determines, who your draft picks are going to be by vote and, which players you're going to sign in free agency, and just do it that way, because someone has to be the guy that you point to when you make decisions, whether they're good decisions or whether they're bad. You have to have that level of accountability.
Well,
Um,
and I totally agree, and that's where in the end that person should be the GM. I mean, that's just what it should be. Now, yeah, I think one of the things with the Lurie thing, Seth, that has been confounding to me. I have viewed for a long while now. Jeffrey Lurie is a great owner. I mean, I've talked many times about the fact I think he's the best owner in Philadelphia sports. I
no
think he's the
doubt.
best owner since Ed Snyder's heyday with the Flyers. I think he's been an outstanding owner. You look at all that they've done, getting the link built, the NovaCare built. They spend money. This isn't a cheap team. I mean, they get free agents. They generally re-sign their own guys. I mean, they of course have been in the playoffs, a ton of times in his 25 years. I think for the most part, he's done a good job hiring head coaches. I think he's run a great franchise, and so and that was something that I would reflect back on, thinking in terms of, okay, well, the Eagles can get back to being pretty good pretty quick because they've done that before, and Lurie has hired the right people, and they've gotten back on the right path. But then I say to myself, and I don't know the answer to this question, but then I say to myself, but has Jeffrey Lurie changed? Is Jeffrey Lurie involved in a way now that's different than he used to be? I would assume so. I don't think there's any question Andy Reid was picking the players back in the day. So this is one of those things where and I hate to say it, I almost feel like we got to get on the psychologist's couch here and figure it out. But I bet you, Seth, if we really got into it, if we really dug deep, I think a psychologist, if he had Jeffrey Lurie on the couch, there would be an aha moment where it would come to light that the Chip Kelly experience and how much Chip grabbed the organization and kind of ran roughshod and from what I've heard, did some just ran it in a way that Jeffrey was unaware of how much it had gotten out of control that final year until he finally learned about it and of course acted really decisively at the end of that year. It struck me like Lurie tried to take back the power, and in the process of doing so, did he run too far with it? Is what I think the psychologist would be able to say. Yeah, that's probably what happened.
That's a good point, because that leads me to the question of the last two head coaching hires.
Yeah.
When Jeffrey bought the team, he hired Ray Rhodes. That ran its course, and then Andy Reid came in.
Yep.
Andy Reid was a guy who had never been a head coach before, just like Ray Rhodes. And over time, between Andy and Jim Johnson and Joe Banner, they created a culture, a winning culture that the team hadn't experienced. And then in comes, Chip Kelly. And Chip Kelly, after 1 year, everyone thought that he was going to, revolutionize the NFL. He was going to bring all of this new offense, this offensive guru. And within 3 years, everyone had figured out what he was doing. That little half a sheet of play calls that he had, everyone had deciphered it. And in the midst of it all, he relegated Howie Roseman to the back office. I think it was smart on Jeffrey's part not to banish or get rid of Howie. I thought it was a mistake on Chip Kelly's behalf, because if I'm the head coach and I gain full access, full control, okay, and that guy that I take it from, you're just going to leave him in the building to be working behind the scenes and stirring the pot and, creating rumors and things. See, for me, if I was Chip, Howie would have had to leave the building. There's just no doubt about it.
I totally agree.
100%.
Yeah,
so now
go ahead.
You fast forward to Chip is fired, Howie's pulled back out of the shadows, and then we hire Doug Peterson. I mean, a coach who was on nobody's radar.
Yeah.
Now, I believed that hire was really all about bringing some semblance of what Andy Reid meant to the organization for 14 years. Okay. That was the first thing. The second thing was, how we hired Jim Schwartz before they even hired Doug Peterson. I thought that was weird. And then all the coaches that came through, you settle on Doug Peterson, and now you fire Doug Peterson and you bring in another guy that no one's ever heard of that's been endorsed by Frank Reich. I get that. But all the guys with cachet, all the strong-willed guys, it seems like in the last two hires, the Eagles don't want anyone like that. Howie doesn't want anyone like that. He wants someone that he can control, someone that won't ever try another power grab like Chip Kelly did, you know. And the problem for me is now I start to hear, well, you know, how he's going to be in control of the roster, how he's going to be in control of game day activations and deactivations. I'm like, what in the world is going on with this organization and their head coaches? You know, is it just Howie, or is it Doug, or is it Jeffrey that doesn't want strong-willed coaches? Because if I'm an owner, I want a guy who knows who he is, that knows what he wants to do, and is confident in himself to get it done. And he's going to hire guys on his staff that are the same way. A guy who wants to have say-so in, you know, who we draft and who we sign, because he knows that those guys fit the scheme of what we do, and their character guys, so on and so forth. I don't want weakness in any way, you know, and I don't know whether Nick Sirianni is a strong guy. You know, I perceived that Doug Peterson was a weak guy until, you know, Mike Lombardi said what he said, and every player on the team, you know, went to bat for him. I was like, well, maybe I missed something here. You know, let me back up. But it seems to me that they're always after a guy that they can control rather than the guy that's going to come in and be like, I'm the guy, I'm making decisions. I got to have say in these decisions. Yeah. And if I can't, then I don't want the job.
Well, worries me too. I agree with you. You know, I talked about how Lurie was probably affected by the Chip experience, but I think the way you drew it out on Howie is totally accurate. I mean, Howie might have been the most affected of all. He's the one that actually lost his job. So yeah, I don't think there's any question that, you know, there's a consolidation of power sort of thing with Howie. You know, that he's probably looking for job preservation. I get it. I mean, you know, when you get canned once, and you know that's got to stink. But what you don't want, as you said, is weakness. You need a coach that can lead the guys in every way necessary. And I'll tell you, so far I've been very underwhelmed with Sirianni. Now we obviously, you know, don't know a ton. I mean, we've heard the press conferences has not been good. You know, I think when he talks about football, I think generally speaking, he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and that's critical. Obviously, I don't know for sure that he knows. You know, checks every box there, but obviously he seems to get it. But man, Seth, the way he presents himself. I mean, I actually thought of you. I guess it was 2 weeks ago when, you know, Sirianni did the second press conference and actually had that line, and I quote. And I'd have to get my voice really high and start talking excitedly. I get to coach the offense and the defense. How awesome is that? And I thought, oh man, if my guy Seth had a new head coach, and the coach said, who came from the offensive side of the ball, and the coach said, I get to coach offense and the defense, how awesome is that? Seth, I think you as a player would be looking real skeptical at that guy.
Well, listen, I think a lot of people are looking, you know, skeptically at him. I think at the end of the day, I'm gonna reserve judgment. And, you know, I want to see how he interacts with the players because ultimately that's what it's all about. It's all about, as a head coach, what are you selling is what it comes down to with the players. Are you selling something that's, you know, shiny enough to get me, a player, to buy in, that I believe that, you know, what you're bringing to the table is going to get me to the promised land, that you're going to make me a good player, that you're going to make, you know, we're going to have a good football team, that we're going to win games, that I'm going to have an opportunity, you know, if I'm an elite level player, you know, to get to a Pro Bowl, that we can get to a Super Bowl. You know, can you provide those things? Yeah. Not only you as the head coach and the leader, but the guys that you've entrusted, you know, as coordinators and as position players. You know, I mean, as a young player, you don't understand. You know, as you begin to, you know, age a little bit, you know, I just don't. I don't think I ever really understood, Joe, how good I had it. You know, I had a head coach with a mentality that was like mine, that was aggressive, Then I had, a position coach for 2 years that drove me. I mean, he drove me like a rented mule, man. Wade Phillips every single day, you know, because I don't think he really believed that I had what it took. And he was going to push me to the limits to see if I did, which was good for me,
Yep.
because that kind of stuff didn't necessarily bother me. Um, and then the list just goes on, the different coaches that I had along the way that helped me become better. At every turn, they gave me something a little different that made me a better player. When Wade left, I had Jeff Fisher. Jeff was a defensive backs coach, and he went, from defensive backs to, defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. Well, the entire skill set of playing, secondary, I got an opportunity to add that to my repertoire. So now I knew how to cover man to man, and I understood coverages. I understood where the holes and everything. See, at each turn, these coaches offered something that helped make me better. And ultimately, these are the things that are going to get your players to either buy in or look at coach every single time he has something to say and be like, man, I don't know about this guy right here.
So Seth, on that point, I don't really know about this guy right here. So, I mean, look, everything you're saying, I'm totally with you. Obviously, what ultimately matters is how Nick Sirianni leads the team and the players, and not a press conference. I think the thing about the press conference is, because it was twice now, that raised an antenna of concern for me. And I get your point. Hey, we got to wait and give him a shot. I know of course we got to give him a shot. It is what it is. He's going to coach and we're going to find out. But my thing is, he was, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most of us, unprepared for the press conferences and overmatched in the press conferences. And it makes me say to myself, and then I'll say to others, if he's unprepared and overmatched in that setting, what happens when he's got to do all the stuff you're talking about? Can he draw up X's and O's? I'm sure he can. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a coach to begin with, let alone a head coach. But he has to not only, as you're saying, get to the players, he's got to coach the coaches. He's a young dude. He's going to be younger than some of the coaches. He's got to – I mean, I remember Jimmy Johnson used to talk all the time. He didn't just coach 53 players. He coached the coaches. Nick Sirianni's got to do that. Nick Sirianni's got to manage up. This isn't just about him managing down to who's my linebacker, who's my cornerback, who's my quarterback. He's got to manage up to Howie and Laurie. And given what I think we all think is kind of an odd dynamic of power and all that goes on, as we were talking about 10 minutes ago, he's got to have that depth feel for, sometimes rolling with what they want, but sometimes saying, hey, guys, in all due respect, it's real nice that you have that opinion. I'm the head coach of the football team. You hired me for a reason. I got to do my job, and you got to let me do my job. So, is he prepared to do all these different things? Maybe he is. I can't say that he's not, but I can tell you, based on how unprepared he was for the press conferences and given his age, it concerns me, just flat out. I mean, Seth, even the questions, and I'm not saying it's the easiest spot, but that first press conference before they had gotten rid of Carson, which obviously was a tricky spot. Everybody knew it. There was a good chance I thought Carson was totally gone. But other people around here thought maybe Carson was still going to be kept. I thought Carson was completely gone the minute they pulled him out of the game with 4.5 games to go. I thought that was it. I was convinced Carson was gone when he was deactivated week 17. Nobody ever even talks about that anymore. I mean, the Eagles played a game and they deactivated Carson Wentz. Why? Well, either because they knew they were about to trade him and they didn't want him to get hurt, and they also knew they might want to tank, and so they didn't want to have to put him in the game, or because Carson caused such a problem behind the scenes that he was, causing a fit, and it's just like, okay, that's it, enough. You're sat. I don't know which of the two it is, but I think it's probably number one. But my point is, Carson was deactivated. The whole thing was bizarre. But entering that first press conference for Sirianni, you got to have a go-to line that just sums up the situation. It's not, it's tricky, but it's not that tricky. Hey, we're going to do what's in the best interest of the Eagles. I'm excited to coach the team in 2021. Big all season for us. We're going to do what's in the best. I'm doing this for you off the cuff. I'm actually showing what you shouldn't do, what you do it off the cuff. You should prepare and just have a sentence or two ready to go so that when you get asked 10 different questions, you can pivot back every time to the same point. It's not hard. He was unprepared for that. He looked totally ridiculous. So I just worry, Seth, because of that, will he be unprepared as such a young guy for other stuff?
Well, see, I beg to differ. I think that football is football. I think his greatest comfort level is probably, being a coach. That's what he does. I mean, he was the offensive play caller for the Colts last year. I think that, football is his wheelhouse. Some people have said, hey, not every, Darius Leonard came out. Hey, not everyone, interviews well. You can't judge the guy just based upon, his interview.
Yeah.
But Philadelphia is a different type of place.
Yep.
He doesn't know that. He's got an idea, I should say. Okay.
Now he does now.
Yeah, he knows now. And before he was hired, Jeffrey and Howie understood that. They know what the media is going to be like. They know what the fans are going to be like. They know what the expectations are going to be like. So I mean, do you set this guy up, in a full press conference and see how he's going to react and what it's going to be like? Do you make, judgments based upon how, he handles himself in the media? That's an important piece of it. That's an important part of it. How's he going to react, when the team, loses 2 games back to back or 3 games back to back? How is he going to react, and what's he going to say, when the team, has some success and maybe wins 2 or 3 games back to back? How do you handle, because the dynamics are different every single year. You got different players from different walks of life with different beliefs and thoughts and values and all of those things that go along with it. How do you handle a disgruntled player? All of those things come into, they all come into the equation. Now you got a 39-year-old head coach. You got a 37-year-old defensive coordinator and a 35-year-old offensive coordinator. And the linebackers coach is 27 years old. Yep. Okay. Now I get you have to have a youth movement on your roster, but where's the experience for these guys from a coaching perspective? And like you said, sometimes, when you get in the heat of the moment, and I've seen it before. I've seen an offensive coordinator on the sideline, literally stuttering. Hey, coach, we need to play. Timeout. So how do you judge all of those things? How do you judge all those things? And I'm looking and I'm like, if he has that much indecision and he allows the players to see it, how does that then affect the buy-in of the players?
And that's my concern. That's my concern. I mean, that's it. I get that he knows football, but you got to be ready to. Let's put it this way: he's got to be ready year one to lay it down. And the guys that followed you, the Trotz generation, Ike, those guys, they've told me that Andy year 1 and Andy year 5 was different, in that Andy year 1 was as disciplined as you can possibly be at driving the guys hard and establishing from day one, hey, this is how we're going to do it, with obviously the kind of vigor that doesn't happen these days in practices because it's not even allowed anymore. But I'm just saying, I want Sirianni not to feel his way into it. I want Sirianni to have a vision and a plan and to go execute it. And I worry if he's really ready for that right now.
Well, Joe, listen, any successful head coach that comes into, a position, that's the first thing you have to do. You have to lay the ground rules. I can remember the first training camp that I went through was the most difficult training camp that I ever endured. I mean, Buddy beat us up. He wore us out. I mean, and the reason why I now that I'm older, I can understand it. He was trying to weed out the guys that truly wanted to be there and the guys that were going to work and the guys that he was going to have to get rid of. I get it. But you set your, and even with Buddy, it was the same, it was the same way. As time went on, the discipline became a little lax because we understood how he wanted to do business. The same way with Andy. He's going to come in, he's going to drive you hard, he's going to find out who wants to be here. This is our protocol. And for a West Coast, type of coach, I get that. I understand that because I played for Mike Holmgren for a year and I played for Mike Shanahan for a year. And I know that, their deal is not to cattle prod you. Their deal is to express to you, this is the way that we do business and these are the expectations, okay? And we're not going to ask you, 3, 4, 5 times to do it, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to show you the way that we operate, okay? And if you're not willing to do it that way, then we'll get you out of here and bring somebody else in.
Yeah,
that's what Andy did, okay? Now the question is, can Nick Sirianni be the same way? Will he come in? Listen, like you said, you can't beat guys up, the way that you used to, okay? But you can still work them hard. You can, make them play fast and do everything fast. And, when you make mistakes, you can go back and you can correct it on the field. I don't believe that you make corrections like Chip Kelly in the classroom. Those corrections, line up and run it again. We'll run it 3 times, until you figure it out, because if we don't get it right in practice, we're certainly not going to get it right in the game. All of those things kind of come into, the equation of how you begin to build and what your team is going to look like. And this is, and I don't know how long Nick Sirianni is going to be here, but in my opinion, this first year will be the most important year of his coaching tenure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the foundation. It's the start of the whole thing. I mean, exactly to everything we're talking about. By the way, Seth, I got to ask you, 17 games. What do you think?
Well, I think that sometimes, the NFL talks out the side of his neck. They're talking about player safety, but then they turn around and, they add a game to the regular season, and I get it. You take one from preseason, but really, how many games do players really play in the preseason, your starters anyway? So you got this situation where, you could get to week 17 or week 18, I should say, and be in a situation where you need that game to make the playoffs. So you have no other choice but to play your players. So, I mean, how physically is all that going to work out? And then the biggest thing I like to know, for the players, how does salary cap wise and financially, how does the extra game impact the players and their salary?
I know some of that. The highest paid guys, their salaries don't go up the same percentage as the lowest paid guys. And that was part of why the lower paid guys were the guys that voted yes. And there was enough lower paid guys. That's what pushed it through. That's why you're seeing stars come out. If you notice, the stars are coming out and saying, well, how the heck did this get through? Well, it's pretty easy how it got through. It's that all the guys, and most of them are making, a minimum contract, that are going to be in the league for 2 or 3 years. Those guys all voted yes because they get an extra paycheck for their couple of years. That's why they voted.
Man, the owners are always playing checkers, and the PA is always playing. The owners are always playing chess, and the players are always playing checkers. At the end of the day, I'm telling you,
it was total divide and conquer. The owners had a brilliant strategy. They executed it, and the NFLPA got rolled. It's as simple as that.
I just, and how they didn't see that coming was just, unbelievable to me. I'm shocked that, that the players were, hoodwinked into, a 10-year CBA. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
They knew that the TV contracts were coming up. The smart thing to do was just, okay, we're going to hold off. We're going to play this last year of the CBA and allow the owners to then go and negotiate this $100 billion contract with all the networks and then negotiate from that position.
Yep.
But it's amazing to think about what potentially they gave up, by not only signing the 10-year CBA, which in my opinion, they should run no more than 5 years concurrently. But think about the money that they left on the table.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And Seth, back to the 17 game thing. It hasn't been talked about much because I agree with you, the wear and tear on the body. I mean, there's a lot of factors, the financial aspect. But I also worry about, and I don't think it's been discussed much, I worry about the end of the regular season, not just the final week, the final 3 weeks, the jockeying for playoff positioning, which happens every year for, typically 3 or 4 spots in a conference. But by the time you get to the final week, sometimes even the final 2 weeks, three or so spots are locked up. Home field advantage might be locked up. I mean, I worry about, the longer you have the regular season, the greater the likelihood is that a team that has clinched home field advantage will shut it down. And maybe rightfully so. I mean, Andy shut it down in 2004. The team had, 2003 had all those injuries with B. West, with Carlos Enns. I forget the whole list, 5 or 6 guys. So that's when T.O. got hurt in 2004. And the Eagles clinched home field that day. And he's like, all right, that's it. We're not playing week 16. We're not playing week 17. Of course, they had the bye. When they played that first game of the playoffs versus Minnesota in the second round of the playoffs, they've been off for 28 days. I mean, the starters played a little bit of one game, but very, very little. And you throw a whole nother week of the season in there. If you have one of those great teams that's 13-2, and you're going to have teams that go 13-2, it happens. I mean, are they going to shut it down sometimes for 28 days, for 35 days? I worry about that as far as the league. I don't know how to put this. Just you want to see greatness rewarded, and you're going to put coaches in a bind with how they're going to. And I'm sure we'll see different approaches. Some coaches will say we're playing all our players. Some coaches won't. It's going to be a little bit like a college football. Okay, guys, we got the bowl in a month, and we got to figure out how to prepare for a bowl game a month from now. And I just know, independent of how it affects the teams, which is what matters most, from my vantage point as a fan, I don't like the idea of the best teams, kind of shutting it down so early. I think it's just a weird thing.
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of a couple of things. The first thing, that worries me is week 18 is going to be like a preseason game. You go out, hey, you'll get a quarter, and then you guys are going to come out. If we've already, got home field advantage, we already got it locked up, because, to your point, that's a lot of, 28 days, 30-something days. That's a long time to go without playing a football game. Yep. And your timing and rhythm, all of those things are off. The other thing is the way the NFL has set it up is that, the 17th game is going to be versus a non-conference, opponent, which for me, weeks, 15 and 16, are really exciting, because the NFL over the last couple of years have scheduled, divisional games those last 2 weeks, a lot of times with, playoff implications, like we went into week 15 and 16 this year with every team in the division in the NFC East still alive, know. Now you lose that in week 18 with the extra game because of scheduling.
But let me ask you a question. I know the Eagles are playing the Jets. Right. I had not heard that game gets played in the 18th week. Do you know for sure it gets played that first week of January? I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah. I think the date is. I think the date is January 9th, if my memory serves me correct.
Yeah, it pushes everything back a week. The Super Bowl is going to be mid-February. I mean, I get that. I didn't know that the extra game is the last game played. I had not heard
that. Well, I mean,
let me put it this way. It doesn't cost you. You could play the Jets week 6. You could play them week 10. You could be right, but you might be wrong on that one. I had not heard that the extra game is the last game.
I mean, where are you going to slot it? I get it that the schedule isn't 100% out, but from most of what I've seen, everybody's listed that week 18 game, and the Eagles, that game has been listed everywhere I've seen it at week 18. Gotcha. So I don't know. I mean, where else do you put it? I mean, what's the point of putting it somewhere in the middle or the beginning of the schedule? What's the point of that? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, unless we're going to play the Jets week 1.
Hey, I play the Jets anytime. Seth, I'll tell you the point of all of it, and you know this, man. 5 letters, MONEY.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it, Joe. Listen, before we wrap up, man, I want to talk. I saw that there was a little debate on your show today about the possibility of Russell Wilson. I
Yeah.
think no shot. I think no shot, my friend. I think that there's no way in the world they amass all of this, all of these assets, to spend them on, a 30-year-old quarterback that puts them financially back in the same position that they were in with Carson Wentz after having the ability, next year to get out from under, a franchise quarterback style quarterback contract. And lastly, things are looking pretty dire for Deshaun Watson down in Houston with some of the information that's coming out.
Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, look, it's impossible to know on Deshaun, but it looks not good. I was surprised today, Seth, how many people were totally against, and I mean totally against, the Russell Wilson idea, as it sounds like you are as well. Where I disagree is, a lot of it was predicated. People were saying, well, we're not ready to win. We're not ready to, well, okay, well, you're closer to winning if you have him. That's number one. Number two, getting a player like Russell Wilson, I don't view, and I don't think the Eagles should view, as a one-year proposition. But you'd be closer to winning in 2022 and 2023 and 2025. I think the guy's a Hall of Fame quarterback. We know he is. I've never seen a Hall of Fame quarterback in my lifetime with the Eagles. You got to go back to the 60s with Van Brocklin and Jorgensen. Guys like you and I don't even know what it looks like an Eagles Hall of Fame quarterback. They got close. I don't mean that as disrespect to Donovan and Randall, and if it's some really, really good quarterbacks, but not a Hall of Famer. And the third thing is the idea of a 32-year-old. I wouldn't make that trade a generation ago, when a 32-year-old is probably going to play for 4 more years and then have a pretty steep decline. Brady's played into his 40s, 43. Breeze, Rodgers, I think, is headed there. The rules they just keep these guys propped up. So I don't see any reason really why Russell Wilson can't still be an outstanding player for a good 8 years. I really don't. Maybe longer. So the idea of turning back on a Hall of Fame quarterback who could play for you for the next 8-9 years, I was stunned, Seth, how many people were against the idea today. Stunned.
Oh, listen, I'm against it because I know, I don't envision Russell Wilson playing another 8-9 years. Even if the Eagles bring him in and they're able to, by a stretch, be able to get, 5 years out of him, and 5 more years, we're right back, where we started all over again, having to search for a franchise quarterback rather than, okay, let's see what Jalen Hurts can become. Let's take the time to evaluate and see what he can become. I like that position that the Eagles are taking because it allows them to continue to build the rest of the roster. And then, quite like I say, about the world of free agents, you build your roster through the draft, okay, and undrafted free agents. You try to find those gems and those diamonds in the rough that you can't get in the draft, okay? And when you're on the verge of winning, you either draft for need or you bring in a free agent at that level that puts the icing on the top of what you actually need. I think all of these moves are made because, they legitimately want to see whether Jalen Hurts can be the guy. And if he can be the guy, that buys them another, 3 years,
yeah.
And he's got to, really elevate himself to get to a position, where he can get franchise money, even if he becomes what, many of us believes that he can be. To me, I just think that, it's the wrong move. I think that if you're rebuilding, then tear the darn thing down and rebuild it and do it the right way and try to find your quarterback. Listen, there's no hurry. The Eagles aren't going to the Super Bowl this year. They might not even make the playoffs. They might not even, win the division this year. I'll eat those words gladly if they find a way to get it done. But for me, this 2021 is a throwaway year. The rubber really meets the road, on March 17th next year when the new fiscal year 2022 begins. And, we begin to build from there with the eye towards being competitive again and trying to figure out how we win our division and then building and going from there.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I'm excited by that path also. Don't get me wrong. And I don't think the Russell Wilson trade is likely to happen anyway. So I'm not saying it's like it's right on the cusp and what are you waiting for? But I would be intrigued. Let's put it that way. By the way, Seth, I got to ask you one question. I just looked down at my computer here at the very bottom, and it has the date, 3/30/21, 2021. And it just hit me, man. 30 years since your 91 Eagles defense. Can you believe, Seth, can you believe it's been 30 years, man?
Hey, man, it seems like it was just yesterday. I was telling somebody the other day, I'm coming up on my 22nd year of being retired. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but it is. It has been. It's crazy.
Seth, what do you make of the fact that you could beat up any current Eagles linebacker in a fight? Let's take that Nate Gary guy. Well, he's not an Eagle anymore. But my money would be on 89-year-old Seth Joyner versus the Nate Gary of 30 years from now.
Man, listen, it's just a different era, a different breed, a different mindset.
Yeah.
And it's tough for me because, I'm an old school guy, and I just believe that, the game of football should be played a certain way. It should be coached a certain way. It should be practiced a certain way. I get why the adjustments have been made, but I think that when players go into the business of being a professional football player, that there are occupational hazards that come along with it. You mortgage, portions of your health for what you do on the field and what it provides for you monetarily.
Yep.
With that being said, I think that when the corrections were made, a lot of the corrections were overcorrections, and that's normally how it goes. When you have player safety issues, you go way to the other end of the spectrum to try to, protect players, quarterbacks, and everybody else, and you overdo it. And I think that that's what has been done. Even the off-season program. I think the off-season is the most crucial time for young players to develop and get better. It was for me, from February 27th to the coaches went on vacation in June. I was right there at the vet every single day, 5 days a week, working out, 6-7 hours a day. And it made me the type of player that I was. I think that, it's a disservice for these young players to only be able to show up. You can go work out, but you can't meet with your coaches. That you can only do football stuff with your coaches during OTAs at 3-day clips. I just don't think that that's beneficial, for the game, and I don't think it's beneficial for a player that really wants to be great. But this is where they are, and this is what the players like, and this is what the players want to do, and this is the new NFL that we have to adapt to and live with.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm with you on all fronts, man. Totally.
Well, listen, my friend, I appreciate your time. We're going to wrap right there. I tell my guests every week, our most important asset, most valuable asset, I should say, is our time. And I want to thank you for spending the last 68 minutes with me, man. I know we could go on talking, for another hour, but I'm going to let you go. I know it's late, over on the East Coast. We're 3 hours behind you. And I just appreciate you, man. So thanks a lot.
Hey, Seth, I appreciate you. It's always a pleasure for me to be on your show. And I'm happy that you and your family have been healthy through the pandemic, man. Stay safe. Better days ahead. I am so certain better days are ahead. And I look forward to it. So stay well, man. It's always good seeing you. And we'll talk up the road for sure. And we'll play some golf this summer, man.
No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Well, guys, that's the show. I want to make sure that I let you guys know the Seth Joyner Show giveaway. I've extended it for the rest of this week. I'll be posting on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, as well as on Instagram, how you can participate. We're going to pick the winners on Friday. Autographed Eagles helmet, old school Kelly Green helmet, a autographed Eagles football, and I'm going to throw in, I don't have one in front of me here, one of my, Seth Joyner logoed hats, because, I screwed it up last week and didn't get the promotion out to you guys, but I'm going to add a hat to it. All three of those items will be, in a picture on the post. What you got to do is refer 3 people. as always, I'd love for you guys to follow me on all social media, especially, you know, on the YouTube channel where all the past Seth Joyner shows are being housed. You can go there and see, you know, past shows. And hey, we'll be right back here next week with another show for you. As always, be good to each other and take care of each other. But most importantly, make sure that you love each other. Peace.